Oh, hello, back again. And let's plow right in and look at some of the stuff that we did a couple of years or so ago. It's always interesting to look back, particularly as we start a brave new world looking forward with a brand new government. Okay, here we go.
Hi, I'm Fergus. I'm the founder of Camino del Vino. We're a new online wine startup in Lewis, and we're looking to help educate people around wine and make wine more accessible to you. We have a whole wide range of wines available, looking from undiscovered regions in Lebanon to sort of your famous regions of Rioja in Spain. We offer a personalised service, and we try and have a unique experience with every single customer that we have. So you can find us on www.caminodelvino.co.uk, and we look forward to seeing you.
It's late Thursday night here in the United States, and you probably can tell it's a late hour because I have bags under my eyes and a sweater to keep me warm in a really a mild climate of Florida. But as the count goes on in some undecided states to decide the presidency of the United States for the next 4 years, I'll share a secret with you. I think it's going to be Joe Biden, the Democrat. I think the trend is moving in that direction, and we probably will know in the next day that I'm right. But even if Donald Trump is a loser, in some ways he's a winner, because he has this country so badly divided that he may become a legend in the minds of all those people who have supported him during the last 4 years, and even in this election. I don't think he's going to disappear. I think he's going to be an influence, not a good one. He's done a lot of damage to this country, to its reputation, to its values, to its health, to its climate, to science, to medicine. And he's done a lot of structural damage to democracy in this country. So I think some of this is going to be long-lasting. Sure, we'll probably come up with a vaccine and get people back to work sometime in 2021. But what's happened to the form of our government has been damaged by Trump and his supporters, his accomplices. And that's going to take a long time, I think, to repair. Our reputation globally is not great anymore. Our friends aren't sure of us anymore. I think some Americans even question their trust in our form of government. So these are the kinds of things that have to be re-energized and fixed. I think it'll happen, but I think it's going to take time. I'm Mark Landsman.
Lockdown this week. It's been unexpected, but this week we've experienced an event which will go down in the history books. Yes, the American presidential election took place, an incredible and explosive clash of candidates, with the result leaving a divided America. But the main event for us in the UK was the reintroduction of lockdown, as the biggest health crisis in 100 years continues to wreak havoc throughout the civilized world. So what else happened over the centuries this week that had an impact on society? Back in 1841, a young New Yorker, John Bidwell, was fascinated by the move westward as the United States kept pushing back its frontiers. The 24-year-old Bidwell organized the Western Emigration Society and led the first wagon train of pioneers across the Rocky Mountains to settle in the largely unmapped territory of California. There were 69 adults, with only 5 women and a single couple with children. None of them, Bidwell included, had ever been to California. It was a tough journey, and they all suffered desperate hardship after having to abandon their wagons to cover the rough terrain. They arrived in California in November 1841. There were only 100 European Americans living in California before the new settlers arrived. Back in the eastern United States in 1864, a presidential election was held. The Civil War was still raging as the incumbent president, Abraham Lincoln of the National Union Party, easily defeated the Democratic nominee, former General George B. McClellan. Lincoln's re-election ensured that he presided over the successful conclusion of the war. But tragically, Lincoln was assassinated less than 2 months into his second term, and he was succeeded by his vice president, Andrew Johnson. In November 1917, leftist revolutionaries in Russia, led by Bolshevik party leader Vladimir Lenin, launched a nearly bloodless coup against the country's provisional government. The Bolsheviks and their allies occupied government buildings and other strategic locations in Petrograd, renamed Leningrad and then St. Petersburg, and soon formed a new government with Lenin as its head. So Lenin became the dictator of the world's first communist state. But civil war broke out in Russia in late 1917 after the Bolshevik Revolution with the warring factions, including the Red and White armies. The Red Army fought for Lenin's Bolshevik government. The White Army represented a large group of loosely allied forces, including monarchists, capitalists, and supporters of democratic socialism. On July the 16th, 1918, the Romanovs were executed by the Bolsheviks. The Russian Civil War ended in 1923, with Lenin's Red Army claiming victory and establishing the Soviet Union. 1922, and British exploration of the Middle East was in full swing. British archaeologist Howard Carter chiseled through a doorway in the Great Pyramids and entered Tutankhamun's tomb, where he found the boy pharaoh's body. The burial chamber had remained sealed for more than 3,200 years. The tomb's vast hoard of artifacts and treasures were intended to accompany the king into the afterlife. Tutankhamun ruled Egypt as a pharaoh for 10 years, until his death at age 19 in around 1324 BC. Howard Carter's find revealed an incredible amount about royal life in ancient Egypt, and quickly made King Tut the world's most famous pharaoh. The Hawker Hurricane fighter plane made its first flight in 1935. It became famous in World War II and accounted for over 60% of the air victories in the Battle of Britain. The plane initially failed to receive government funding for the building of a prototype, but Hawker Aircraft were so convinced of its success they proceeded to build it as a private venture. The first prototype flew this week in November 1935. The Hurricane tag was given to the plane by King Edward VIII during a visit to Hawker in July 1936. A total of 1,715 Hurricanes flew with fighter command during the Battle of Britain. It's estimated that Hurricane pilots were credited with 4/5 of all enemy aircraft destroyed in the period July to October 1940. In 1968, Republican candidate Richard Nixon, a congressman who had served as vice president under Dwight D. Eisenhower, was elected President of the United States. Nixon had stood for president in 1960, but lost to charismatic Massachusetts Senator John F. Kennedy. In 1974, he resigned rather than be impeached for covering up illegal activities of Republican Party members and his staff in the Watergate affair. The case was made famous by two reporters who used information from an informant called Deep Throat, who was never properly identified. Nixon died on April the 22nd, 1994, at age 81 in New York City. This week in 1972 saw legendary steeplechaser Red Rum win his first race. The horse was seen as hard to control and was sold on several times. He ran in a 5-furlong cellar at Aintree, in which he crossed the line in a dead heat victory. The Red Rum turned out to be a champion thoroughbred steeplechaser. He won an unmatched historic treble when he won the Grand National in 1973, 1974 and 1977, coming second in 1975 and 1976. The Grand National has been described as the ultimate test of a horse's courage.
He was also renowned for his jumping ability. He never fell in 100 races. The 1973 Red Rum victory came from being 30 lengths behind, and this victory is often considered one of the greatest Grand Nationals of all time. Red Rum's historic third triumph in the Grand National was voted the 24th greatest sporting event ever. In 1974, the world was captivated by the brutal murder of a 29-year-old nanny named Sandra Rivet in London, and the rapid disappearance of the main suspect, an aristocrat named Richard John Bingham, or Lord Lucan. Lucan was a dashing British aristocrat and army officer, known for his prowess at backgammon and bridge, and his fondness for vodka martinis, powerboats, and Aston Martin cars. The murder took place in the dark basement of a townhouse, after which Lucan disappeared forever, meaning no one can say for sure what happened. He was declared officially dead in 2017. After murdering his children's nanny, Lucan attacked his wife, then fled south. He stayed with friends in the East Sussex town of Uckfield, where it is claimed the mafia, to whom he owed money, executed him. He was thought to have escaped by ferry after his blood-stained car was found in New Haven, or that he jumped overboard from a ferry with rocks in his pocket. No one will ever know. This week in 2004, 7 people were killed and 61 injured when a high-speed train hit a car on an isolated level crossing in a Berkshire village and was derailed. The 5:35 p.m. London to Plymouth service smashed into the vehicle on the unmanned crossing at 100 miles per hour, 30 minutes after leaving London's Paddington Station. There were around 300 people on board the train at the time. 2008, and back to elections again. Barack Obama became the 44th President of the United States, the first black person to do so. His father was from Kenya and his mother from Kansas. President Obama was born in Hawaii in 1961. He was sworn in on January the 20th, 2009, and served 2 terms in the White House. So elections dominated the headlines several times in this week in the past, as well as gruesome murders and winning racehorses. More events in history next week. This is Mirador Television with Once Upon a Time in This Week.
When you've missed the train, don't despair. Have a nice cup of coffee. And perhaps a mince pie. At the Runaway on Lewes Station. After that, why worry about the next train? The Runaway on Lewes Station. Relaxation beyond compare. Oh, a little trip down memory lane. One or two historical things there. Is the murder of Lord Lucan's wife's, or Lady Lucan, I guess she was, Nanny. The theory has never changed. Lucan was estranged from his wife, but worried about his children. And it's believed that he broke in to remonstrate with his wife, bumped into the nanny in the dark, who probably panicked, the stranger in the house, and to shut her up, hit her. And unfortunately, he was a strong, virile man and killed her. And then he panicked and fled south. Lucan was an interesting character. He was mooted to play the part of James Bond in the very first movie, Dr. No, who eventually picked Sean Connery. But he was his lifestyle reflected the Bond character, and he was handsome enough to be considered for it. Spent a lot of his time playing cards, at which he was particularly good. But while being particularly good, like a lot of card players, he won some and he lost some, and ended up owing a lot of money to the mafia, London mafia, and played cards with the elite at Lord Aspinall's club. And some believe that he ended up being chopped up and fed to the lions in Aspinall's zoo. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. He fled south, and he had friends in Uckfield, a little town not too far from Lewis. And he was... it was there that some believe that the mafia did away with him. There were anonymous reports, secret reports, and it was believed that probably they came from a poacher because they didn't want to reveal his identity and have to have him go to court. But then the police reported seeing him drive out of Uckfield to the south, and his car was found on a street in New Haven. So the second theory is that he climbed on board a ferry and off he went. Some people believe he was overtaken by the enormity of what he'd done and jumped overboard with rocks in his pocket. But who knows, because after Uckfield, all sight and trace of him was lost. Good morning, Philip. We're just talking
good morning,
about
Keith.
Lord Lucan and the fact that his last appearance was from New Haven, which of course is not very far from Lewis. And
No, it's not.
He spent overnight in Uckfield, where he had friends who had rather a large estate. But nobody, I think, will ever know, because not many clues came out of investigations after his disappearance. One interesting thing that did happen is I was in Northern Ireland at the time of this scandal, if you want to call it a scandal, and a photographer friend of mine, who was the chief photographer of the Daily Mirror, and a very interesting character, was asked to go, and there was a town called Lucan in the Irish Republic, and it was owned by Lord Lucan's family. And he gave a very interesting expose of what it was like to have a town that was owned by a lord. But it wasn't until I think in about 2015 or 2016 that this town knew what its future was, because Lucan's estates were nobody knew what to do with them until he was declared officially dead.
Precisely. They
Yeah.
couldn't do anything with them.
No.
A similar mystery, of course, in a slightly different scenario, was the escape of the three men from Alcatraz. Clint Eastwood starred in the film about that. The inmate called Miller, I think his name was, and the two brothers. And the three of them sailed into the bay with on a raft made of gabardine coats, somehow inflated, and they were never found. 90% of people believe that they would have drowned in the bay, because that's what tended to happen outside San Francisco there. But then there were sightings, not so much of Miller. His name is either Miller or Morris, I can't remember. But photographs of the two brothers in South American locations, on beaches, in a villa, became apparent. So people revised their opinion and took the view that at least the brothers had survived and were now sunning themselves in a country where they couldn't be got back from. But there we are.
Yes, and if no bodies were washed up, there is a good chance that they did in fact make it.
Well, precisely, because from what I read, as a fact, previous escapees who had drowned did wash up eventually, but none of those three did. But anyway, yes, I intended to join you earlier, Keith, but literally as I left you, my phone went, and it was a very old legal friend who rang me because he's doing a case in Chichester. He's a barrister, still working. So he wanted to let me know and was keen to hook up.
Are you going to go and have lunch with him?
Say again.
Are you going to go and have lunch with him?
Well, I prefer lunch because I'm not at my best in an evening.
No, normally.
But he won't have time. He won't have time for lunch because he's in the middle of a case, which should last the week. I'm going to say to him, if there is a day when you think we could fit lunch in, I would prefer that. But we'll see. It's really up to him. He's the one working. I'm not.
Right. Yes. You're not very far from Chichester, are you?
It's 13 miles.
It's not too bad.
And on a good run, it's 15 minutes.
Just going back to disappeared people again. Do you remember any detail about the MP, John Stonehouse, faked his own death?
Yes. Well, I can't say I remember detail. I remember just what you just reminded me about. Yes. And there have been other examples over the decades, haven't there? Of certainly faked deaths and so on. But I agree, Lucan is the one that still exercises the mind because of the character he was, the connections he had, good and bad, and the final story. So Yeah, but to discover that there is actually a Republic of Ireland town or village called Lucan that is owned by him or the family is extraordinary.
Yes.
Mind you, having said that, I live in a town that was at one time owned exclusively by the Duke of Norfolk. It isn't now.
Well, we have two tied villages just outside Lewis. One is Firle, that is
Oh,
owned by
yes.
Lord Gage, and the other is the name just escapes me for a moment, but it is. I think it's owned by Lord Lambton.
Yeah.
And Firle has a superb pub, a really superb pub. No street lights, and I think I heard noise behind me. I'm not sure whether it's a deck, or for the last 2 days of last week, the barman was Joe, and Joe is a cricket nut. And when I say a cricket nut, a player. He's a very, very good cricketer and plays for a lot of local teams. And one of the teams he plays for is Firle, and it has a delightful little little ground, and it is owned by Lord Gage, whose ancestor is said to have arranged one of the very first cricket games way back in 1600 or so with Lord Sheffield, on which they put a stake of 50 guineas.
I think I knew about that. I know of Firle because two members of my old chambers have lived there or still do live there. At least one of them lives there. I didn't know it had no street lights. I didn't know it had a lovely pub, and I didn't know it had a cricket ground.
Yes.
And I didn't know it was a tied village.
Uh-huh. Well, its church is actually pre-Norman. It's a Saxon church, and it has what I describe as a mad vicar, and he was very successful in the advertising industry before he turned to the cloth. I mean, his congregation swollen because people have such affection for him because he's a madman. And one Christmas, and somewhere in our archives, when we get around to looking at it, I dressed up at Father Christmas and went up to the vicarage and sat with him and debated. He talking about the spiritual side of Christmas, and me tongue in cheek saying, no, it's only for commercial reasons. And it was a load of fun. And now you won't find too many vicars who will sit and do that sort of thing.
So that program, that broadcast is somewhere in the archives.
Yes.
Well, you need to find that.
We do. There are lots of good things in the archives. I don't know whether you tapped in this morning, but I just played one where we looked back on 1 November and were able to talk about looking back at President Nixon, the first people to colonize California, and all sorts of interesting bits and pieces that we forget about and then are reminded by looking back at these programs.
Well, it was watching part of that just to check whether you were live or not that reminded me of Lucan and all the other things you mentioned as well. Very interesting, because you forget these things.
Yes, you do.
You forget them, and some are very good, some are quite, horrific to remember. But no, I did catch some of that. Well, I imagine when he joins us, Harry needs to be asked about the political events in France.
Well, indeed, and in fact, I'm just about to invite him.
Because I don't think even he would have foreseen that the left by itself have achieved a greater number of seats than the centrists. I don't think even he would have expected that.
No.
Although he regards them as complete lunatics.
Yes, which I think that they are. But we discussed at that particular time last week seemed the unlikely instance that the right were going to be defeated, and what would happen. And Harry actually did outline how this combination of people would come together, of parties would come together, and that there would be nobody there who could possibly form a government. And as usual, Harry's predictions have come absolutely true.
I'm afraid they have. But you know, the dictators in the world must be laughing their heads off.
Oh,
you know, this is the mess that democracy creates.
Yes. Yes.
Whether you do it first past the post or PR. You know, this is the mess. And then in the States, you know, we've got an increasing number of Democrats telling Biden to give up, throw in the towel, man.
Yeah.
And if he does that, who's going to be in his place? They'll never elect Kamala Harris as a president.
And also it'll make a difference as to how long he hangs on, because then they would have to, I mean, what are we in now? We're in July, and the election is in November, isn't it?
It is in November. And
which
it's all
is not
going Trump's way because
the Supreme, really very not long away.
No,
and they're going to be left. The Democrats are going to be left scrabbling for a candidate.
Correct, and it will go in a blink of an eye because of the Supreme Court ruling, of which I am gobsmacked. But it's America. I know Harry admires the American economic model, but I do not admire the American legal model one iota. Politics and the law do not mix.
No, you're quite right.
So political appointments, elected judges and appointed by a president from a particular party, to me, is very wrong.
Yes.
But what that ruling has done, as you know, is pushed all the trials to come into the long grass. So he now has a clear campaigning run, Trump, into the election.
Yes.
The mistake, in my view, that Biden made was that he refused to have a neurological examination. You know, it's a bit like a lie detector test. We don't have them over here, but they do in the States. And, you know, if you say you're okay, take the bloody test.
Yes. Well, I mean,
test.
He is typical politician, isn't he? He is very loath to give up power. And perhaps that's the one sameness of all politicians, whether it's PR, whether it's first past the post, whether it's autocratic, whatever. No politician ever wants to give up power. I mean, look at Putin. He's had, what, nine sessions, coming in with 88% of the vote, as if that's possible in any place that runs an open and democratic poll.
They pretend it's democracy, but they put up stalking horses as opposition candidates who, when interviewed, for the sake of the media, have no policies whatsoever because they know they're just stooges.
Yes. Yeah.
At least in China, there's no such pretense.
No.
And there certainly isn't in Korea, that's for sure, North Korea. But no, Trump's got a clear run. And rather like what we've just experienced in this country, to me, it's a given now.
Yes, I agree with you.
And it'll be a given created by a low democratic turnout. Not because Trump is terribly popular, but what choice do they have? I mean, even Melissa, who's, as you will confirm, a very hard-headed realist, you know, she doesn't see any mileage in Biden at all, does she?
No. As you say, I mean, she is a hard-headed realist, and I think that on our Friday forum, we've been getting really the way it is in the United States, as opposed to the way that the media paint the thing.
Yes, well, that's what's interesting in many ways about her. I mean, once Harry stopped flattering her, then we get some sense. He's he's like you. He's such a rogue. You know?
Yes.
She sees through that. You know, she's very switched on.
Yes, she is. But actually, Harry is pretty switched on too.
No, of course he is.
Which makes it a fascinating combination when we watch.
He's too switched on. I'm sorry, he wears me out. You say we're a good double. Well, actually, no. I can't do more than half an hour with him. He actually wears me out. You know, it's like having a history lesson or an economics lesson or a biology lesson.
But I think that you're right that Harry's mind covers far more than politics. And what we have to do is to steer him away from politics, I think.
Well, it's almost impossible. No, I mean, that Normandy thing was a fluke, but that really took him off the scent, and he just couldn't resist it. He couldn't resist going off-piste and demonstrating his knowledge acquired in the University of Life. Because he's rather proud that he was never particularly well educated. You know, he's a man of the world, as they say. I have a mate exactly like him who came from Bradford and has been a very successful entrepreneur all of his life. And he was the same. He was undereducated. But he says, you know, University of Life, Philip. And he's got there. He's got there.
Yes. Well, if you've got basic intelligence, experience, put experience into that mix, and you often get somebody who is much more valuable than somebody with 3 PhDs and a certificate of something or other. You know,
see, this is the flip side. You can be overeducated, and even in this job market these days, there are some employers, whether it be public or private employers, who will tell you you are overqualified.
Yes.
And there we are. But so you can overdo it. And again, another topic from Harry, you know, and yourself, the worthlessness, frankly, of the so-called degrees. And there we have Mark Maybe, who can give us an insight into that. I think he would. Yes. Hello, Harry.
Hi.
Is the volume okay?
Sorry, I hear you very badly.
Is the volume okay for you today?
No, the volume is still pretty low. I can barely hear you.
Then can I suggest that you have somebody take a look at your?
No, you sound fine.
Oh, really?
Keith sounds fine.
So it's me.
Yeah.
As
How very
usual.
strange. Yeah, I mean, you sound
Well-
fine to me, Philip.
Well, my mic's on full settings, and just check. Yeah. Well, Harry, you don't need to hear from me anyway. It's all about you, so we'll move on.
No, I can. If I listen carefully, I can hear what you're saying. I'm sure. Yeah.
Well, the obvious starting point today is this dog's breakfast in France. I mean, even you, I suspect, never imagined this loony left would do quite as well as they have.
No, I didn't. I knew there was the vote was the second round was going to be rigged, but I didn't realize to this extent. There were 200 different constituencies where the person with the best chance of beating the National Rally they withdrew competition, so that it just which is against the will of the people. It's a totally undemocratic system, and so they put what they call a cordon sanitaire around the National Rally, and they got only, less than half of the seats that they thought they were originally going to get.
Yeah.
And the price they've paid, of course, is they've now got this weird collection of left-wing extremists who are going to try and govern. And I mean, when I say weird, I mean it's beyond belief. It's you've got communists, Trotskyists, Islamists. You've even got one guy that's been elected who is under order to commit to quit the country because of terrorism activities, and is under an expulsion order, and is now being elected an MP.
Well, you were saying last time that there's even a certain group who they don't believe in prisons.
Oh, well, there are certain people, I don't think this is likely to happen, but wanted to empty the prisons because they feel it's unnatural that people should be deprived of their liberty. But certainly there will be a move, a collective move on the part of this left-wing consortium to make sure that if anybody else is sent to prison, somebody is released, so that you maintain the stability of the prison, the numbers in the prison population, rather than build new prisons. So it will result in a lot of quite serious criminals being let out on the streets. There's no question about that. But far more interesting thing is this group. It's not a homogeneous group. They'll be fighting amongst themselves in no time flat. I don't know whether you've got any memory. Well, I doubt if you would remember this because it happened in 1924.
I don't remember that, Harry.
No, you don't remember that. Well, in Spain,
I was minus 31 in those days.
Yeah, in Spain, the regional party of Catalonia, based on centered on Barcelona, elected a government of anarchists. Now, anarchists, by their very nature, don't believe in structure. So they went to the parliamentary sessions every day with the sole intent of beating up on each other.
Now, what I do remember, because I found out in Barcelona, was that the reason that the Sagrado de Familia, the iconic cathedral that's even now unfinished, the reason that was unfinished even then was that the anarchists had broken in and they had stolen the plans. And that was in the 20s. They stole the plans.
That could well be a factor that exacerbated the realization of the full project, because initially, of course, they only built the facade of the Sagrada Familia. But I think the big reason is that this ran out of money. You do have in many of these countries that are very staunch Catholic countries, you do get a reaction in the Newtonian sense against religion. Probably the most noticeable example of that we've ever seen in history was Mexico, when they actually banned the Catholic Church. The reforms by Benito Juarez of 1869, he wanted to dispossess the church of its holdings, so he outlawed the church. They owned 7/8 of Mexico at the time, and this led to a series of strange presidencies later on at the beginning of the 20th century. The alternating presidencies between Calles and Obregón, where they closed churches or nailed the priests to their church doors or shot them, and the reaction against that is quite amazing. So you do get that in countries like Spain. It hasn't particularly happened in Italy, for instance. The two most Catholic countries in the world are Mexico and the Philippines, according to the number of people practicing the religion. But it is amazing to, as I say, the Newtonian sense, to each action you got an equal and opposite reaction. And so this reaction against the Catholic Church doesn't surprise me. If there was an anarchist negative reaction to Gaudí and his completing his work on the Sagrada Familia.
Yes, and it was also on behalf of a family, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Hence the name. It was on behalf of a family, hence the name Sagrada de Familia. Is that right?
I still can't hear you very well, Philip.
It was okay. Don't worry.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You better take over, Keith.
Right. Harry, you actually, when we talked on Friday, I think it was, I said to you what would happen if the right didn't make it, which we both thought was unlikely. But you did actually paint this picture of all these people being in charge. And now, I mean, will they ever form a government? Or because if I could, if not quite a similar situation, but when I worked in Bosnia and Herzegovina for about a year and a half, and they had an election. And because of the variety of parties and so on, is they were without a government for something like a year and a half. They couldn't form a government, to be quite honest with you, it became a political thing because the country just went on regardless. Now, not as sophisticated a society as France, but it didn't make that much difference that the politicians weren't actually doing anything. So, what is going to happen in France?
Well, I think what has to happen under the French Constitution is that the party that came out with the most seats in the Assembly and in the Houses of Parliament, they have to put forward a government proposal to the president, and he will accept it or not. They will choose to put forward a prime minister from their ranks, and perhaps some of the key ministries at the same time, to show that they have a structure capable of governing. and then by law, by the constitutional law, the president will be obliged to appoint them as the new government. But how long that will last when they don't have a majority is anybody's guess. Because it actually leaves Macron himself, through his presidential party, which is known as Ensemble, Together, leaves him as the kingmaker. So maybe the question of this throwing of the dice, when everybody said, "Oh, this is a silly thing that he's done," maybe he's got himself into more power than he had before, because he'd progressively lost members of parliament in his presidential party, and now he's won them back again, and he is actually number 2. So I don't think any party could govern in France without the backing of the presidential party. So it's maybe a smart move on his part. So he could put a brake on any of their excesses. It's interesting to see how this will work out. But when you haven't got a majority, and it's very loosely knit, in fact, not knit at all, they'll be fighting amongst themselves. I think we can imagine a period, even if they do name a government, when very little work is done. But taking you back to the Serbian example that you gave me a minute ago, quite clearly in any modern society, the services are provided by the structures that are already in place. So people continue to do what they've done before, and the civil service runs the country essentially. Well, I mean, to what extent, in fact, does the civil service not run the country in Britain?
No, the civil service runs the country.
Yeah.
I mean, Margaret Thatcher's favourite programme, Yes Minister, is
exactly.
She said it's reflective of exactly what happens in Parliament.
I think so. I mean, the ability of a government minister in Britain to change the course or apply some sort of new rules and regulations can easily be thwarted by the blob, this huge amorphous mass of and highly politicized and highly unionized now, the civil service, and growing, I think, every year by some prodigious figure. The civil service grows by so many tens of thousands of members every year. I mean, it's becoming the tail that wags the dog, I feel.
Oh,
so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
Harry, I've adjusted my microphone. Is that any better?
Slightly better. Slightly better.
Not much.
Oh, when you come closer, it's better.
Oh, is it?
Yes, that's better. Is it a directional mic or?
No, it's just an iPad. If I come closer, you have the displeasure of seeing me close up.
Yes.
But, so if I do this, you can hear me better.
I can indeed, yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, okay.
So
well, that's sorted that out then.
But it is an interesting situation, and of course it'll take a couple of days for the dust to settle here before we see exactly how this charade is going to play out. But it doesn't bode well for France. France is in great economic difficulty already. The euro has begun to slide because if the policies of this extreme left grouping are applied, it will cost the nation hundreds of billions of pounds. They want to take retirement age back to 60. They want to control food and gas prices, petrol prices. What else do they want to do? They want to tax the rich. They want to increase inheritance tax. They want to reintroduce a wealth tax. So the hit that the economy is going to take is massive. But if you take a longer view, it will lead to a schism, to a break between different parts of France, notably rural France and the big cities. And the farming communities, the farmers were particularly behind the National Rally Party because they're being put to the wall in many parts of Europe and particularly in France. So there were a good two out of three voters, almost half the number of voters will feel that their political will has been frustrated. And that will fester. And people talk about it being a setback for Marine Le Pen's ambitions to become president in 3 years' time, when the presidential term expires, Macron's term expires. But I think it will work in her favor. It'll just give time for resentment to build. So it'll be a division in society, and of course, its impact on Europe, on the European Union. The European Union is in a state of slow disintegration in any case. So I just hope Britain doesn't want to try and get back in there. But if one of its key components, France, would not follow the fiscal rules that are laid down by Brussels, it could actually pull the pin on the European Union. So we're in for some very, very major changes over the next 3 years, no question about it. And now the president, like the Prime Minister of Britain, can call an election, but you're only allowed to do it in France once a year. So the president, however impossible governance turned out to be, Macron could not call another snap election for another year. So we're going to have chaos for the next year. It's be interesting to see how it plays out.
By a year, do you mean literally a 12-month period?
12-month period. He can't call it. He can't dissolve Parliament or dissolve the
Assembly.
Assembly.
Calendar year, it's 12 months.
12 months.
The
Yeah.
last one.
Yeah. So
I mean, you mentioned the EU and Britain, the horror of rejoining. I don't think Starmer's manifesto made any reference to the European Union at all, did it?
Well, Starmer wants to cozy up, I think, a little bit to Europe. There's certain things that he wants, but you can't cherry pick with Europe. They will, unless we go open borders and eventually common currency or something silly like that. I don't think Brussels will entertain any overtures from Britain, and perhaps nor should they. I mean. They would like to get their hands on British business, I suppose, and one way to do it is to play hardball. But it depends. It depends what Starmer's ambitions are. Is Starmer a doctrinaire socialist? Is he Corbyn in sheep's clothing?
Well, that's a rhetorical question, but I don't think he is at all.
Yeah.
I really don't think
it could
he
be.
is.
It comes across as rather dour, rather uninspiring, but he did back Corbyn enormously. I mean, as a politician, he probably had to get to slowly edge his way to the top.
Well, that's the point, because it went sour, Harry, didn't it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It went very sour.
And he has managed to distance himself from the extreme left of the party. But he's got Angela Rayner there sitting next to him.
Yes, I think it's the two ladies that we have to watch.
Yeah,
and she's a pretty hard, she's a force to be reckoned with. And then
she's the sheep. Well, she is the wolf in sheep's clothing, in my opinion.
Yeah.
If there's any true Corbynite in that front bench, it's her.
Yeah.
I'm not saying she's mates with him, but she's from a very deprived background in my hometown of Stockport, Portwood, brought up by a single mother who had bipolar, as we call it these days, and who on a daily basis could have committed suicide.
Yes.
Raina herself had a child at the age of 16, as sadly many of those deprived estate kids do.
Yeah.
So she's brought up a daughter, I think it is, since the age of 16. She came to light as a union rep. And from the time she became a union rep, she became recognized by Prescott, because one of her favorite sayings is, "I'm John Prescott in a dress, that's me."
That's correct, yeah.
And so she's a force of nature. And I'm in no doubt she and the other female that Keith mentions, is it the Chancellor?
Yes.
Rachel Reeves, yeah.
Rachel Reeves,
Yes.
who's speaking to business people at the moment in wherever, not in the Commons, but somewhere in the Home Office or whatever. Doesn't matter. But anyway, they are the power behind the throne. Starmer is a glamour boy, actually. I would never call him dour, but he is a showman. It's the image for him. I don't think he's a politician. And I certainly don't think he's a natural born leader.
No.
I may well, as ever, be very, very wrong, but I think the real power will be with those two ladies.
Mm-hmm.
They are
I agree with you. Yeah.
They are the eminence grise, without a shadow of a doubt.
Well, one of the things that worries me or surprises me as much as worries me is some of the doctrinaire positions he's taken, even before he got elected, and without exposing any particular aspects of his future policies, he just suddenly attacked VAT on private schools. I mean,
Correct.
That's so small. I mean, it's you just going to drive these schools out of business and put extra burden on the public schools, on the state school system, and you're going to raise very little money in doing it. In fact, you might. So this was ideological. It was doctrinaire. So hasn't that just exposed the fact that under this veneer of not being a threat, that he is absolutely, dedicated socialist. And they talk about equalization, redistribution of wealth. Well, when you redistribute wealth, you take money from somebody that's worked for it and give it to somebody else who hasn't.
That's correct, Harry. And you've made your views about that particular dichotomy very, very clear, and correctly so. Now, he may be doctrinaire, but I mean, the education minister, the new education minister, was on the radio this morning. He believes that the money that they get from taxing the private schools is going to pay for 1,000 more teachers. He said that on the news this morning.
Yeah, well, actually, I think the figure actually was talking about 6,000 new teachers.
As ever, my heart goes into my mouth when I discuss any figures and facts with you, because I am appallingly inaccurate, I'm afraid. It's what retirement does to you. But no, in all seriousness, it was all right. It was thousands of new teachers. But even I thought at the time, if it's just VAT, how is it going to produce that much money?
Well, it won't. It can't possibly do it. So, as I say, that's a purely doctrinaire move. I mean, and why should that be his flagship policy that he announced almost triumphantly from the very beginning?
Because it is, as you say, it is a socialist position. But your original question was, or rhetorical question was, is he Corbyn in disguise? I still don't think he is.
Well, he went to, he himself, obviously bright kid, studied hard. God bless him. I mean, all credit to him. He went to Reigate Grammar School, and it became, while he was there, it became a paying school, and he managed to obtain a bursary. So he had a paid for education. So he was part of that system. It's amazing. It's amazing payback or negative payback to a system that put him where he is today.
I couldn't agree with you more. That's a more
I have a particular affinity with Reigate. Yeah, I have a particular affinity with Reigate Grammar School. Believe it or not, a great number of ex-Reigate Grammar School types play rugby for Reigate, and I played rugby for Reigate. So for a number of years, and the most amazing thing about playing rugby for Reigate is that at the time I was living in Montreal, but my business took me through London every couple of weeks or so, and I phoned up and got a pickup game with the third team.
Excellent.
And so I became a member of Reigate Rugby Club. I'm just wondering, probably when Samo, no, it wouldn't be when. This was in the late 70s and early 80s. Maybe he was. Maybe that's what. How old is he? He's about 60, isn't he?
Yeah, he's younger than me.
Yeah. So.
And compared to you two, I'm a baby.
Oh well, God, everybody's a baby compared to Keith and myself.
No, there's a delightful neighbour and friend of ours lives over the road, who's now 81.
Mm-hmm.
And I rather tire of being told I'm a mere baby.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like a baby physically.
But talking about Reigate brings me to one of my favourite subjects, and that is my couple of pubs in Reigate, which are great. The Red Lion, which is where we used to meet up before and after rugby games, and the Home Cottage in Redhill. I don't know whether you're familiar with that worthy establishment.
Look, I know of Reigate, I know of Redhill, but I don't know them as towns.
Yeah. Well, Redhill was considered the poor country cousin of Reigate. Reigate was pretty posh, and
yes.
Redhill was a little bit more working class.
Yes, well, that is still the case.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
These leopards don't change their spots very often. No, that is still the case. But Redhill is, as Keith will confirm, is very much more a railway hub than Reigate. Reigate's a bit of a branch line, really. But Redhill...
It's a railway town. Well, the original name of Redhill was Redhill Junction. Yes. And
Eric, is there anything you don't know about anything? I mean, for a man who prides himself on, if you like, attending the University of Life, as opposed to an education that, well, cut short's rather a harsh phrase, but you left school early, certainly by modern standards. Your encyclopedic knowledge of virtually everything is astonishing.
Well, most of this knowledge is useless.
No.
Nothing too quick will get you a cup of coffee.
Look, you're talking to two people, me and his nibs in the hat. I mean, we're full of useless information. It interests us, doesn't it, Keith?
Absolutely, yes. Trivia is always captures an audience.
Keith gave an example before you came on.
We can combine a couple of subjects here. One is, I believe there's a move in Britain now to renationalise the railways.
No, now, very good point. It's not renationalising in the overt way. They're just not going to renew the franchises.
Oh, I see.
So it's going to be piecemeal. So what Starmer has promised, let's see what happens, is that as each franchise comes up for renewal, it's nationalised.
Okay.
So
Yes.
it will inevitably be piecemeal, won't it?
Well, it's interesting to see how they do it, because technically it's in two entities at the moment, I believe. There's the people who operate the rail services, and the people who provide the trackage and the system for it
Yes, so
to
this
operate
rail
with.
track, I think it's still called rail track.
Yes.
Keith will correct me. I think it's still called rail track. It may be a different name. And
Yes,
and
I
then
think
there
it's a
are
different name.
Then there are it is it, Keith?
I think the name rail track was dropped.
Yes, I think you're right.
And they took it off the market, didn't they? Because I had some rail track shares, and very sensibly I sold them when they were 15 quid a share, and they ended up at something like tuppence.
Yeah.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear you got your timing right for once.
Yes, for once.
As
I'm not a market player.
As the actress said to the bishop. Yeah.
But railroads have had a curious history. It's interesting to give it a little bit of a perspective. I suppose we've got to go back to Thomas Newcomen, 1712, invented the first steam engine, atmospheric steam engine, and the steam engine was perfected in 1763 by James Watt, and eventually applied to rail use by Cornishman Trevithick in 1805, and leading to the first railway in Britain, which was the Stockton-Darlington line, which was launched by George Stephenson in 1825.
Yep.
And then
the heavy speed of 9 miles an hour.
Yeah, then the first major one was of course the Liverpool-Manchester Railway. But the story of railroads is a very interesting saga. It's evolved mostly in the United States. The United States has now got by far the most rail trackage in the world, I think. 220,000 miles or something of rail trackage.
And is that all run by Amtrak?
Well, Amtrak is the passenger service that runs on the rail lines.
Yes.
But still, the individual rail companies are still operating under their own separate entities. They were briefly amalgamated. Certainly, the Northern Railways were amalgamated during the American Civil War. From 61 to 63, they combined into the GMR, the Great Military Railroad, and they then built in those 2 years more rail trackage to supply their frontline troops than existed in the whole world put together.
Goodness me.
Yeah, and but the big breakthrough came, of course, when the Union Pacific and the Southern Pacific linked the east and west coasts, and the driving of the last spike in Ogden Point in Utah in 1869. But it's an interesting story, the railroad saga. It's largely an American story, even though it began in Britain. And I don't know, was I talking to you the other day about railroads in France?
No, we've never talked about railways in France.
Mm-hmm.
Which I would like to do. I mean, the French, as I see it, there's none of this rural sensitivity. If they want to do a rail line, if they want to do a rail line, they'll do it.
Mm-hmm.
Am I right or wrong?
Well, yeah, absolutely. They national priority rules the roost, and if you've got a very centralized government in France, which means you can overrule the NIMBYs and other groups, vested interest groups, and if they decide to do something like an HS2, they'll do it. Oh, by the way, HS2, the socialists have hinted that they can reintroduce the northern leg of HS2. Have you read that in the British newspapers at all?
No, I haven't. I was unaware of that.
I haven't either. Yeah.
Where
did that come from?
Conservatives were moving away from it, and one of the first things to do was to limit the northern extension. But whoever is in charge of that sort of thing in the new Starmer government has refused to rule out reinstating the northern extension.
I find that extraordinary because they were saying pre-election that the money that they would save by not doing HS2, they would use for something else.
Yeah.
Well, that's already a slight U-turn, isn't it?
Well, it's a deviation from what they were saying, but once you've got a majority of, gosh, how many seats have they got? 411, is it?
412, I think.
412. I mean, they can pretty much do whatever they want to.
Well, of course they can. It's whether they retain any integrity and keep any of their promises. But then again...
And I would think that it depends also on the amount of money that's available, because I mean the Tories started to back away from that because they realised just the big hole that it was putting in the national budget without actually providing much service.
Yeah, I've never understood myself what the economic justification was for HS2. It was seen initially as a political initiative to link the North and the South.
No, that's exactly right.
The dispossessed areas of the North could be brought into the. But
that's right. That was its raison d'etre, definitely, and that never actually changed. But it's a combination of that and what Keith has just said. The last government realised that, well, not just the money, Keith, in my opinion, but the ethic, the ethos of it was actually pointless.
Yeah.
The Northwest is no longer deprived. The Northeast is deprived.
Yeah.
And HS2 was going nowhere near the Northeast.
No, quite, yeah.
There are, I mean, when we speak on a Friday to Mark Maybe, who even now still travels regularly from the Midlands down to London, they can't even run that service. I mean, the horror stories, you may have heard him describe them, of late night cancellations.
Yeah.
And having to spend money in a hotel.
Yeah.
To get home the next day because they're out of staff. Or there's a signal failure or whatever. So it's all very well, you may agree, having these wonderful plans, but if they can't even run a basic service like Euston to Manchester, which when it runs is a superb service, the trains are marvellous, fast. There's a real improvement there, but they just can't run it properly. So, French railways, what are we talking about in terms of reliability?
Oh, they're pretty good. They're pretty good. They in terms of running on time and mechanical reliability, they score quite well. And of course the high-speed trains in France, the TGVs are quite impressive. I mean,
they
are. Yeah, they're very efficient. No, it works well in France. The railway. You do get some last minute cancellations, but very, very rare. Very rare. and he gets rail strikes, of course. France is quite unionized, and they can apply pressure through bringing the rail services to a halt. But no, generally speaking, it's pretty impressive, I would think. Yeah.
How much is a contribution to national economies do railways make now? Is it increasing or decreasing? Or how important are railways?
Well, as we move towards a service economy, well, we are in a service economy. You know, we go from a hunter-gatherer economy to an agricultural economy, then to a industrial economy, and then finally a service economy and post-industrial economy. And so, in a post-industrial economy, a service economy like France, it's less. It probably represents a smaller component part of the nation's economic structure than it used to, but obviously still very important. An awful lot of there was a time when there were a lot of strikes on the French railway, which pushed traffic onto the roads. This is when they built the new road systems and have all these trucks on the road. It's where the railways shot themselves in the foot, I'm afraid. But the same thing happened in Britain, and so a lot of goods travel by road now.
Well, it happened in Britain not because of strikes, but because of beaching.
Yeah.
Who slaughtered the rail network.
That's interesting, beaching, because as a young reporter, I was working for the Evening Gazette in Middlesbrough at the time, and one of my briefs was to cover the Beaching Commission hearings in the Northeast, and rather boring actually, but they many of these beautiful little rail lines, we just did away with them. I remember very sad in a way. It was part of the Britain's heritage.
Yes, well, I accept that one can't get too sentimental or rose tinted about it, but the one that always saddened me particularly was when my first two children were much younger. We would holiday in North Cornwall regularly.
Yeah.
Predominantly in areas around a town called Padstow. Padstow had a railway station and a railway line that allowed trains from anywhere to come in. Beaching got rid of that. There's now what's called the Camel Trail, which is a bicycle track that goes all the way, I think, to a place called Wadebridge, which still has a railway link. And we've cycled it in the old days. I've seen footage of that old railway branch line in action, and it must have been the most wonderful thing to travel on.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And it brought tourists in, you know. I always found that very sad, and that must have happened all across the country.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. I have a particular special place in my heart for the old Saltburn to Whitby railway line across the cliffs there, and of course, naturally, the famous Pickering to Whitby rail line, the Moors Railway, which is still operating barely. It's struggling to keep alive at the moment. It was the railway line, of course, which was featured in the Harry Potter films.
Yes.
Yeah.
Indeed, it was. And down here, we've got the Bluebell Railway. One of the best ever parties I ever went to, genuinely, was my now, sadly, a chap I commuted with for so many years. who was a PR man for one of the big tobacco companies. And he had a joint 65th birthday party. And we were so bloody honoured by being invited, myself and my wife. And it was on the Bluewell line.
Mm-hmm.
So you arrived, and it was a period, I wouldn't call it fancy dress, it was a period dress event. And so we arrived at Sheffield Park. There was a like hors d'oeuvre, aperitifs there in the main room there. Onto the train, silver service dinner. At every station going up the line, you had a chance to get off, and the jazz band that accompanied the train would play at every station.
Yeah.
And people who wanted to dance could dance.
Okay.
And then back again from Horsted Keynes. It was the most amazing experience.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Well,
So
a slight variation on that, Philip, was Valerie and I, for 2 years running, went on their Christmas special.
Oh,
and
did
you?
You
did the same thing, and you had silver service, and you got off at Horsted Keynes on the way back for a little while, and they had carol singers. Especially for the arrival of the train, and you had mulled wine and so on, and it was a marvelous experience to go on a steam train at Christmas.
Oh, absolutely.
I've got a terrible admission to make. This expression "mulled wine," what does it actually mean? Is it wine that has been gone through
spiced and heated, Harry?
Is it gone through a second treatment, or?
Well, the original was it was wine with a hot poker stuck into it.
Oh, I see.
That was the original.
They put a liqueur. They put a liqueur in it or something, do they?
It's served at Christmas. I mean, they just heat it in a regular coffee heater and turn a little tap. But it's hot wine, yeah.
Okay, that I didn't know. I've always
with
spice with this expression.
Harry, with spices.
Okay, with spices in it, yeah.
Like cloves and nutmeg. I imagine the French would absolutely loathe it, but who knows?
Mm-hmm.
But they've got Glühwein. They've got Glühwein in Germany and Austria, as you know.
Yes.
It's not dissimilar. But
can I tell you a little story, because I was watching the Euros, and the commentating team had a box, a studio with the Brandenburg Gate overlooking the Brandenburg Gate, and it would be about 1990 thereabouts. Yes. 1990, when the wall came down. 89, and I went out to cover the Troy Hunt, which was the privatization agency, and I was in Berlin a couple of times, and that area where the Brandenburg Gate is, and which is now beautifully resculpted and rebuilt and so on and so forth, had 4 or 5 those caravans that you serve drinks off, and they were all serving Glühwein, and it was the only way that they can make a living.
My goodness. Mm.
Yeah. So I remember it as wasteland with just these Glühwein things. Now it's just absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, but it was in East Berlin, wasn't it?
It was what? Sorry.
It was in East Berlin.
Oh yeah, it was at the Brandenburg Gate.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which was in the east, Russian occupied. or Soviet.
Yeah. It would. The wall had come down, so actually there was where the difference between the two the walls actually where when it was a partition city it had become waste ground. There was nothing there, not even the bunker, not even Hitler's bunker, which was one of the things that when you went to West Berlin, when it was West Berlin, you climbed up a little stair and looked out over the wall, and there was sort of a hump in the ground, and that was Hitler's underground chancellery. But that all became just muddy, rough wasteland when in the immediate aftermath of the wall coming down.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they must have disarmed it, because my recollection and reading led me to believe that it was like a military zone. There were mines, there were subterranean mines, everything to blow everybody up who dared to go across. So, Keith, they must have.
Oh yes.
They must have disarmed it all.
Well, when the wall came down, when they started to pull the wall down, I think that Berliners were very, very careful about that, wandering onto that patch, because you're quite right. It was heavily mined and booby trapped and all sorts of things. But they started to clear it very quickly, because you reminded me that it's 89 that the wall came down, and I was there it would have been 90 or 91 to do these stories. It was out there with Siemens mostly. We covered it with Siemens. Because they had factories in Potsdam, so we were able to go south into East Germany to cover some of these business stories. But they did clear it fairly quickly. I don't recall that in going onto this no man's land, as it were, we were warned, be careful, you might tread on a mine.
Achtung, Minen. Achtung, Minen. Anyway,
yeah.
1989 to you is the coming down of the Berlin Wall. 1989 to me is Manchester City stuffing Manchester United 5-1 at Main Road. In Alex Ferguson's early days.
Mm-hmm.
And he was in danger, believe it or not, he was in danger of being sacked.
Mm-hmm.
My goodness, had that happened, the world would have been a better place. But there we are. Because I had a barrister friend, and I had no idea that he had been to Manchester University, and he was there in 1989, and he was near Main Road. The then stadium is an area called Fallowfield. And there's a lot of student accommodation there even now. And he lived in his digs in Fallowfield. And he said he knew City were winning and had won because the whole of the area could hear the cheers as every goal went in. So that's how he remembered that particular. He was a football fan, but lifelong QPR fan. Harry, did you watch the either the France-Argentina game, the rugby, or the England-New Zealand game?
I watched the highlights. I was able to watch the highlights because the actual game itself, England-New Zealand, was only on Sky television. It's a big shame. I think they could broaden their audience appeal so much more if they put it on regular television, and they'd
yes, absolutely
make more money in the long term. But at the moment, plebs like myself were excluded from watching it directly. But I did see the highlights which were rebroadcast on various on the internet, of course. So that was fun. high quality rugby. There seems to be they've got a new coach, New Zealand, and it seems to be changing things around quite a bit. I hope he doesn't break the rhythm. He put Bowden Barrett on the bench,
He
which
did,
I think
yeah.
was a mistake because it cost him a couple of penalties. But there you go. I mean, it's interesting enough. One thing I don't know anything about really is soccer, and yet I read in the papers that there's a lot of people sniping at Mr. Southgate, the coach. Is that
Yes, well,
why is that?
well, the reasons England, incredibly, are now in the semi-finals of the Euros.
Mm-hmm.
I say incredibly because, as Keith, if he's been following it, may agree because he reads the papers, England have been dire. They've been dull, unadventurous, lucky, and yet they're in the semi-finals. And in the early parts of the qualification, they were so bad that the usually very loyal England yobs who go over, particularly to Germany, were actually throwing plastic beer glasses with beer in them at the players and the wives and girlfriends. So it got that bad. And the pundits, the likes of Lineker, who's up himself exponentially, Shearer, who's his lapdog, they were really heavy and harsh. But what I think is happening is that Southgate is a firm believer in a strong defence. And I'd be grateful for Keith's opinion on this. And I think the fact that although they're dire and unadventurous, they are now a well-oiled machine that could well even go on and win the bloody thing. What do you think, Keith?
Well, I thought about this, and my initial reaction was, I don't understand football intimately, so my opinion is all wrong. But then is everybody else's opinion was wrong as well. And I think that you have to really be steeped from a management point of view and probably from the players' point of view in international football to realize what you're doing. Yes. And I found it very interesting that Lineker, who was really very, very critical, is in the post-match thing on Saturday night was, oh yeah, and they, changed his tune totally.
Well, I mean, in fairness to, I didn't watch that game. I watch the score texts, but I don't watch the game because they are seriously boring. You see, the difference between international football and national football is if you were to compare the England team with Manchester City, I'm sorry to go on about this, they are completely different animals.
Yes.
Pep Guardiola would be ashamed to be in that coaches area watching a team like England play like that. He would probably go and commit suicide, quite honestly. Yeah, it's a completely different game. It's steady, boring, crab-like. Inevitably ends in penalties, and it's a very different environment. But I think that I've lost this feeling that they're going to lose everything because they haven't lost everything. And I think that as a tournament goes on and a collection of random players from national leagues gel, you end up with a very powerful body. And in football, like in any team sport, you will know as rugby players that accrued togetherness, comradeship means a huge amount. And you get to the point where you actually feel unbeatable. Now, on Wednesday, England faced the Dutch. Now, the Dutch have got through by a miracle. Everybody wrote them off. So we have two miracles playing each other. And dare I say it, God knows what's going to happen.
Well, I fully agree with the principle of club teams, both in rugby and soccer. If you're playing with the same players every week, there's a cohesiveness which develops. You know what the guy next to you is going to do, and all the rest of it. So it's much more interesting than a team that's just suddenly thrown together for an international tournament.
Yeah,
I can certainly understand that. But is another name that keeps popping up, almost in a negative connotation, is Harry Kane. Well, I thought he was one of the top players.
He used to be.
Mm-hmm.
He used to play for Tottenham Hotspur.
Mm-hmm.
He was their main man. He was the Premier League's highest goal scorer for at least 2 seasons. Then he fell out at Tottenham. Daniel Levy, the very cynical, and you have to be, fairness, chairman of Tottenham, decided to cash in on Kane. And incredibly, Kane went to play for Bayern Munich. He started off very well because the Bundesliga, the German league, is far below the standards of the Premier League.
Mm.
You know, let's make no mistake now, and this isn't bragging, it's a fact. The best league in the world for sheer entertainment and competitiveness is the Premier League.
Okay.
So you can stick Serie A, La Liga, the Bundesliga, Ligue 1, where the sun don't shine. None of them can compete with the Premier League. And the stuff in Saudi Arabia, Australia, and North America is just a joke. It's an old folks club.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's where fading stars go to die, but still earn ludicrous amounts of money. So Kane went to Germany, initially the star of the show, scoring goals for fun, and then it dried up because they got used to him. Because he's a one-something pony, a one-trick pony.
Yeah.
He's a one-trick pony. He is a very untalented, classic British-style centre-forward. And he needs the service. You know, it's very... Football, actually, at its best, is very simple. You get a ball to a goal scorer, and he will score. Manchester City used to have a player called Sean Gota, who was this big, tall, black Bermudian guy who came to City as a Manchester United reject. And initially, he looked like a cart horse and played like one. Yeah. But as City went up the divisions, because they got as far down as the old third division, I watched them in places like Fulham and Reading, in the old third division. It was awful, awful. But as things improved and he got better, he became a leading goal scorer at Premier League level. And the city motto for him was, because they called him the GOAT after his surname.
Mm-hmm.
And the saying became, feed the goat and he will score. And he did. And what amazed me was when I watched the highlights of the England game at the weekend,
Mm-hmm.
there was an England fan holding a banner that said, Bellingham is our GOAT. He will score. And that rather fascinated me. Was that man a City fan? Was that man just somebody who knew about Gota? Because Bellingham plays for Real Madrid. He's one of their star players.
Right. Gentlemen, I'm going to have to draw this discussion to a close, and your expertise in this area, Philip, is
come on,
shining through.
Keith. Declan, get Declan in. He wants to talk about the football as well.
Yes, he arrived and went down to the office. But Liza has arrived and is waiting in the wings to
sorry.
to come on, because it's her it's her
sorry,
time.
I forgot.
So we should cede our place to,
natural beauty.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Yes.
But,
we're on for Friday, are we? Or
we are indeed. Yes.
Okay. So
fascinating morning as usual.
I shall bow out and leave the space for Lisa, and see you on Friday.
Okay, Harry. Look forward to that.
Bless you all.
Don't forget, you're going to get your young lady on at some stage.
Yes, from the tourist office.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll work on that, but I'll give you plenty of I'll give you plenty of warning ahead of time.
All right. Thanks, Harry.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Harry.
Bye.
Okay, so now we are going to have Liza Page join us. But we'll just take 2 minutes to set up a proper background for her. So we will be back in a couple of minutes' time. Until then, toodle tip.